Yeah, for those who don't know, a municipal plan is a high-level bylaw. Like, it's not a bylaw you go to look at to see what you can do with your property or something like that. It's talking about things like your services for the municipality, infrastructure.
It's a complex and a fascinating history that we could take the opportunity to expand on.
I would like Council to direct staff to publish a brief response matrix that will show how key public comments are addressed.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the top stories of the week from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We begin this week with the St. Andrews Municipal Plan. And we have a special guest today, Alex Henderson from the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission.
Thank you for coming in today, Alex. Can you start off by just telling us what exactly a municipal plan is for those who still feel a bit in the dark?
Sure, yeah. For those who don't know, a municipal plan is a high-level bylaw. Like, it's not a bylaw you go to look at to see what you can do with your property or something like that. It's talking about things like your services for the municipality, infrastructure, land use regulations, which leads to zoning and things like that. But it's looking at the whole municipality, and lots of things influence the future development of a community. And so a municipal plan is a bylaw to sort of coordinate and arrange some efforts to achieve a vision that the community and the council wants to see for themselves.
Is there a common misunderstanding about municipal plans or a question that always comes up for you?
Well, yeah, there can be all kinds of false information out there. And, the one thing to note is planning is old in New Brunswick. It's not this new thing that's being imposed on everybody that's, taking away something. Planning has been around in New Brunswick for over 100 years. It's just been done at different levels. In certain parts of the rural areas of St. Andrews, for example, planning may have been more new in, say, since the 1990s. But there always has been planning, there's been planning in the urban part of St. Andrews for much longer than that. So it's not a new thing. It's not something that is being imposed without the consent of local governments. It's something that is hopefully a very bottom-up exercise where people who are living in the place get to influence the plan, and it's meant to represent the interests and values and desires of local people.
And what is it about the 10-year mark that makes updating this so important at this time?
Yeah, so a municipal plan is usually set to be a 10-year framework for future development in a community. And that's probably a pretty realistic future-looking exercise. You can't look 50 years into the future because you're just not going to know what the different changes and trends are going to be there influencing 50 years from now. But 10 years is a pretty reasonable, we can kind of have a good sense of what 10 years might bring. And you're supposed to update your plan every 5 years. Like every 5 years, you're supposed to make some tweaks and adjustments because certain things might have been envisioned and they're already done. They've already been made progress. So new things might be an issue of the day, and so you come in and you update it. So it's an ever-living type of process. You never have a municipal plan and it's done, set forever. In fact, these things get amended. Someone may have a development proposal that doesn't mesh with the municipal plan, but it may be good development and the community may want it, and a council can vote to make a change. So it's all part of that process. It's an ever-living, evergreen type of thing.
We got the question, why are we doing it so close to the last one? And there is a really good reason for that. What is that reason? Yeah,
so the last one would have been 2020, and it hasn't had a 10-year lifespan to it. But we are at the 5-year mark, so it would be a time for an update anyway. But the reason we need to kind of rethink the plan is because St. Andrews got bigger. Bayside and Shamcook were local service districts under the direct supervision of the province of New Brunswick. And again, they had their own plans that were rural plans, but they didn't talk about anything that are related to municipal services. And now that those areas have access to municipal services, there's an opportunity to do things like putting in boat launches perhaps in Bayside or Shamcook, and maybe a responsible level of government who could look after said things. little parks or trails that may never have been possible when they were a local service district. So there's actually an opportunity to look at new things that their old rural plans would not have been able to look at.
Okay, but then I imagine there are also on the flip side some concerns when you're used to being a rural area.
Yeah.
What are you hearing so far?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of concerns. Anytime you do this, you're looking at how private property is used. Very sensitive topic, understandably so, right? And I think the example of, what is the rights of someone at their private property when, let's say, they live on Shamcook Lake? Because there's been regulations on Shamcook Lake for some years, and it's designed to protect the drinking water source. But you don't want to make the regulations so restrictive that someone who has a house can't do, let's say, an addition to the house. They may already be in a setback of the lake. So you want to make sure that it's reasonable, but protecting the bigger public interest. And the bigger public interest of Shamcook Lake is if that lake was contaminated due to, say, like a development that was there that really didn't belong there, then that could compromise the drinking water source for an entire community. And that is a public interest. So you have to balance public interest with private interest and be reasonable. And that's the goal, and it's a stated goal in this draft plan.
And we heard in St. Andrews just a few things. I had the privilege of going to that meeting and the one in Bayside. We heard a lot about, particularly here, about incorporating Indigenous culture kind of into the plan, in the idea that we're maintaining the historical significance of St. Andrews.
And there's nothing in this document that really acknowledges that we do have a history that is not just United Empire Loyalist history, but it's a complex and a fascinating history that we could take the opportunity to expand on.
What did you hear, and how could the plan potentially deal with that?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. I think sometimes with this reconciliation, we can tend towards tokenism, and that's, hey, it's good to do those recognitions, but the next step is to take real actions. And one thing which we have heard from the nation is protection of history it shouldn't just be about buildings on Water Street, but protection history goes millennia back with the material culture and history that's in the ground, literally in the ground, and could be lost at, let's say, if a major excavation happened, say a new gravel pit was started, and a precious artifact and Midden site was destroyed. That would be something that needs to be prevented at all costs, because it's a protection of Indigenous history that we can do with real action at the local level. And so that would be an example. And there could be more, and some ideas were discussed at that meeting. And so I think something to continually press into and look at how we do that well.
When you look at a town like St. Andrews, what's unique about a municipal plan here when you have something like a national historic district and all these factors that are important to a lot of the residents? Yeah,
and it's listed in the draft plan right now, but one thing that's super unique about St. Andrews is the historic business district. It's a major tourist draw, but it's also a place that everyday residents go for their everyday needs. You go get your groceries, go to get your hardware supplies, go to the post office, go to the bank. You're going downtown, but you're also in and amongst a lot of people there for tourism. Mm-hmm. What can happen, and you can see this in places that overdevelop for tourism, meaning that it's just totally chock full and everyday residents stay away completely. Mm-hmm. That the commercial services end up leaving downtown. They go to like a strip mall, they go to a big box center outside of town on a regional road or highway. Mm-hmm. And that's something which should be avoided, because one of the things that makes St. Andrews so unique is how authentic it is. Mm-hmm. The heritage and culture isn't just a facade. It's a real place that real people live in every day. And I think that's something precious and may not be fully. It may be one of these things that can be missed. Yeah.
I'm certainly guilty of going to St. Stephen for my groceries in the summer, so if they'll forgive me for that. And I wanted to touch just quickly on accessibility. I heard it at the St. Andrews meeting, but I also heard it in Bayside last night. A lot of people were talking about the accessibility of the downtown core, and understandably, these buildings were built before that might even have been a consideration. How does that fit into the plan? How does that work into the plan?
So in the plan right now, there's proposals around how the street infrastructure is done. And if you look at accessibility from an all-age perspective, meaning from if you're a kid or a senior or someone with disabilities, like if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who's not a middle-aged, healthy adult, that's accessibility. And so thinking about designing street infrastructure in a way that is safe, meaning like you have dedicated active transportation corridors for people in wheelchairs or people on bikes or scooters. This type of infrastructure can make a place feel safe and accessible. So that's talked about in the plan, talking about the idea of making those key infrastructure, roads and streets safer. And that could also extend to rural roads as well. Adding in a wider shoulder, as the province has done on the 127 different segments, absolutely makes those rural roads safer for people who are walking along. Now, it's the public right-of-way. We often think of roads as the way for cars to get from point A to point B, but the public right-of-way historically has always been for all users to travel through it. Horses, buggies, people walking. It is the public's right-of-way. So we have to think about all users of the public right-of-way to have accessibility.
As we move forward, we have to look for the ability of adding accessibility. And I mean, even people in wheelchairs, like can they make it to the beach and things like that you see elsewhere. As planning goes forward, I think they have to look for opportunities.
We talked about the need to update municipal plans regularly to accommodate changes such as population growth, in the recent case amalgamation, which is a huge population growth both in terms of people and geography. But what about things like you mentioned, there could be changes, and things like short-term rentals have become just very commonplace now. Many people use them and also have them on their residential lot.
Yeah, and so there's a need to look at how you prevent certain housing just becoming just purely short-term rental. It's in St. Andrews historically, there's been people who've live here for part of the year and they rent out the house the other part of the year to make it viable for them to own a property here and enjoy living here as well as another place. So tourist homes have been around for many years in St. Andrews. But the problem with the new ways of marketing it, Airbnb, VRBO, it's now at the level where it's an option, alternative to going to a short-term rental or hotel. And so the market is way bigger. And so there's also national players who are buying up houses to just convert purely to short-term rental, and now that's no longer housing, right? So there's a kind of a balance between people. Some people need that extra income to sustain a residence in St. Andrews, or they just having that extra income is good for their quality of life, but it's a balance between that and having just purely short-term rentals that never are residences at all. And that's something that needs to be addressed. Now, this is different from, let's say, a glamping dome. A glamping dome would be considered more of a camp or a campground if there's multiple in a set. So this wouldn't necessarily be affecting the ability to do that. I think that some reasonable regulations and limitations around large-scale campground development is something that people have been asking for, but not requiring them to be like residents or something like that.
And so the solution sort of that's been proposed or is being proposed is that Airbnb be secondary use, like short-term rental be secondary use to a property.
Yeah.
Okay. And I want to turn to Bayside. We heard a lot about the agricultural designation. I wondered if you could explain what that means and what that means for land development.
Yeah. No, and this was a topic of conversation, and it's a concern from both people who are farming and for people who own land who would like to develop. So there's a balance to be struck there. See, places like Bayside have had farming for over 200 years, and turnip farms and so on. And this is part of the history of the area. And you do still see active farms in Bayside, livestock and so on. And now, and this is, it is part of the rural environment, rural way of life to be able to have livestock. But the challenge has been where people have done residential expansion and development in those areas, in beside farms, is you can have challenges for those farmers where now they're dealing with odor complaints from their new neighbors, dealing with sound complaints, and now they can't really expand the farm in the way they hope to. And we're dealing with a food security issue in New Brunswick where we're importing near 90% of our food, and we're dealing with fragile global market. So we really need to think about preserving the farm fields we have, because once they're gone and developed over, they're gone. And we have viable class 3 and 4 soils in this area, and the province of New Brunswick is now saying you must promote the protection of farmlands in your planning. And so we're responding to that and developing the plan to do that. But it's also a balance, because there's people who have land that could be developed, and rural residential is part of the rural way of life as well. So making sure we have locations for those rural residential expansions areas is also an important part of it. So we need to balance that.
Mm-hmm. How do you make these points to people who have been amalgamated recently, who might have these concerns right now that it's a cookie cutter approach to the entire St. Andrews municipality?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to make it a cookie cutter approach, because we want to make sure that if there's planning policy, it makes sense for the geography, makes sense for the culture, meaning the people who live here, the values of people who live here, and it makes sense for regulations, the things the province requires us to do. And so we want to make sure that the plan is sensitive to essentially reality on the ground. You know, does this make sense? And this whole the public engagement is around testing this. Does this make sense? Could this be improved? Is there good ideas? Because it's not a done deal. This is a draft. This is a discussion piece. Council has opportunities to amend it, to send certain sections back for revision. So all of it's up for negotiation, so to speak. So no, we want to make sure it makes sense, and that the approach is realistic and viable, and will work for the 10-year period.
We're getting to our 2 final questions. I wanted to touch on, you talked about, the limitations on the Shamcook Lake drinking watershed, but it was pointed out at Bayside that it's kind of our only drinking water source, and so that presents challenges in and of itself, given it is the only one, but also we're now experiencing more drought conditions and less precipitation. How do we fortify our drinking water sources, and how does the plan deal with that?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that came up in the meeting in Bayside was around the quantity of water being used by the different users of the lake. So there's the houses immediately around the lake, but we have the industrial park that uses water from the lake. We have the town, and formerly the Atlantic Salmon Federation had aquaculture tanks. In fact, they were the largest user, according to one study that Department of Environment commissioned through those old aquaculture tanks. So getting those, decommissioned, and they are decommissioned, but keeping them decommissioned and not restarted as they were would be one way of dealing with quantity of water issues. Now, there's more discussion about maybe there could be additional measures taken, and now this is something which also touches on a different department, the Water Sciences branch at Department of Environment. And so they're actively working on a separate project to the municipal plan around issues around quantity, water budgets, and testing water quality as well. So the municipal plan will touch on some things, but some things are also the purview of a specific other department, and that would be one where we would want to work in conjunction with. And that's the goal, to make sure that this municipal plan would complement existing efforts to protect the quality of water of Shamcook, and to also support some of the principles around conservation of water.
Okay. I'd love to hear a little bit about public engagement sessions, and obviously in St. Andrews this has been a big deal when it came to the wharf issues, but if people miss these public engagement sessions, how do they make sure that their concerns are heard?
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of ways to get engaged. So tonight, there's going to be another meeting in Shamcook at the Atlantic Salmon Federation building. But we're also going to be doing an online session for people who are remote right now, might be out of the community, or just missed all the other sessions. And that's on the 17th at 11 p.m. That's going to be on Zoom. And so, yeah, there's ways to get involved in the information sessions. But if you missed all those, you can still write in to council to say, here's what I think needs to happen, and here are some changes I would recommend to the plan. Because again, these changes can happen. This is not a done deal. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in today, Alex. We appreciate your insight.
Yeah.
Our guest today has been Alex Henderson, the Planning Director for the New Brunswick Southwest Service Commission. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to look at a zoning bylaw meeting in St. Stephen.
I don't believe they're written in stone. I think there's movement. I hope there's movement for everybody that has a cause, and you know, we can't please everybody, we know that.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We are heading over to St. Stephen, where there was a public hearing on Thursday night regarding zoning bylaw Z-4. And basically what that is a rule book for how land can be used, business, industry, residential. But again, under amalgamation, this poses new concerns for residents who were once in a rural area and are now part of the municipal district of St. Stephen.
And there are areas throughout Charlotte County that have been part of what's called rural plans. So there would have been some rules governing the development of land and things like that, but maybe not to this extent, right? People in rural areas live in rural areas because of the freedom that they get to do what they want with their properties and you know, have animals and do all the things that they want to do, build sheds without getting, you know, a building permit and that sort of thing. But zoning bylaws are separate documents from what we talked about in our earlier segment. They're different from a municipal plan, but they kind of are intimately connected to each other because one directs the other sort of situation. And it deals with, you know, what type of what designation your land falls under. Is it a commercial zone? Is it an industrial zone? Is it a high density residential, low density residential, conservation, agriculture, as we talked earlier? So what were folks sort of saying at this meeting, and what were their concerns?
Well, it was quite a full room. We were upstairs in the Garsland Civic Center. Very full room of people. I expected to be there a long time. However, we only heard about 3 people from the public get up to speak. And again, it was about concerns. I'll talk about the rural residents because they seem to have a lot of support from one area in the audience in particular. And it really does have to do with just concerns that things will be very different now. And I think we've heard this across Charlotte County for people who are now under amalgamation, a part of a municipality that they weren't in before.
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to be something that comes up is a fear of change and a fear of government overreach is a word I hear a lot. But it's about, you know, maintaining balance between, you know, if you have someone who has agricultural land, if they're intending to use that agricultural land, how does that impact their neighbors who are mainly residential? If there's a subdivision, you know, a certain number of meters away from them. So it's about finding balance between residents and land use and protecting people's peace and quiet. We heard actually at the Bayside meeting, you know, there was a question about tourism season, and there is an effort to expand tourism into Bayside and Shamcook and the way that it exists in St. Andrews, albeit on a smaller scale. But one of the questions was, how do we maintain our peace and quiet? We live out here because we want peace and quiet. So there is always that fear and hesitation around change and regulation and government. So I was interested to hear that there was only 3 people that stood up and made comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go to the Municipal District of St. Stephen's website and you check out Z-4, it can be a very lengthy document, and I think sometimes just looking at a document like that's very dry when you're reading it too, can seem overwhelming. So I think there's fears, whether it's something to do with livestock or your property in general, that if you don't have the answers quite yet, and it wasn't a meeting where the council could respond. Right. So questions weren't exactly answered, concerns were heard. And I think, what comes next is how council responds to this feedback.
Yeah, and I just want to make it clear to folks that this is part of the public hearing of objections. So those concerns will be written down in minutes taken by staff, and they will look at the plan and how do they form the plan around these concerns. Those concerns get implemented into the plan in certain ways. That plan, the zoning bylaw, comes back to council. They do first reading. They can make amendments. They do second reading. They can make amendments, and they can do amendments up until third and final reading. So even in that third reading, they can make amendments if they feel like they need it. So, I think it has to be a healthy discourse, certainly between residents and councillors, and they have to understand that their feedback is going to be taken and heard and understood and then reflected in the changes the council is being asked to make. Mm-hmm. So there is plenty of time for the plan to be amended and changed and fall in line with some of the concerns that were expressed at this meeting. So plenty of time is the thing I want people to remember.
And I think it's always great to see when you go to a public hearing like that you do see a healthy number of people, even if they just come out to listen, be engaged with local government and be present to hear what's going on. So maybe you don't necessarily have concerns at the moment, but they will be coming as this develops. So very good on St. Stephen. It's great to see a full room when you go to events like this. We always hate it when we're the only ones. So a healthy interest in your own local government is always encouraging.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of the idea that municipal government is the most important level of government because it does talk about how you can use your property. Sometimes it's how you recycle or if you, here in St. Andrews, they even changed the way they bill water. So it's a consumption-based system now. Before you would have been getting a flat rate. Now it's consumption-based. So it really, if you end up using more water, your bill's going to go up. So these are the things that, should be at the forefront of everyone's mind. So if a municipality offers you the opportunity to engage with them, offer them feedback, do it in a respectful way, and that's how democracy progresses forward.
Yeah, and we obviously knew with amalgamation happening not that long ago, it would be a long while of growing pains, and we're witnessing that now across the county, really across the province. But when we focus on these issues locally, we will be seeing this for quite some time. It will take a while to massage this into something that we're used to, but we're still in the thick of it right now. If you want to see the whole public hearing of objections, it is on CHCO-TV's YouTube channel, but we will play a clip from that meeting right now.
On section 413 regarding resource excavation setbacks, I would like to recommend that the setback from dwellings be changed from 150 meters to 300 meters. And for anything under 300 meters, require environmental noise impact assessment and discretionary approval from the public. Discretionary public approval with public input, And on 415, consent for blasting or crushing, that the change be made to owner of a lot to owners of every lot containing a dwelling within 600 meters. This would clarify and also clarify whether consent is registered and runs with the land or expires with the title. And then on to my other point, which is regarding wind energy. I want to state my position and some requested changes to the bylaw. This pertains to, so first of all, I want to state that I am 100% opposed to the siting of any wind farms or grid-connected wind turbines anywhere in the municipal boundaries. And the reason I bring that up is related to the definition of utility use, which is found on page 17. So I would like to see that that definition clarify that it does not enable utility scale wind in residential, rural, urban, commercial, or industrial zones. I would like to see that the bylaw prohibit large-scale wind energy projects in all zones and clearly distinguish private household renewables from utility-scale infrastructure. If council considers any future proposal for wind energy, I would like the bylaw to require a binding community vote prior to approval. So in terms of just the overall process, I would like to to make a comment around process and follow up. And this has been mentioned before. I would like Council to direct staff to publish a brief response matrix that will show how key public comments are addressed. And by that, I mean some kind of a dispositioning matrix that would show that someone's comments were kept, modified, or removed, and that a rationale be provided. And in that way, people will see their input and also understand why their input may not have been adopted and have an understanding about that.
The bylaws, zoning laws as they're called, I don't believe they're written in stone. I think there's movement. I hope there's movement for everybody that has a cause, and you know, we can't please everybody, we know that. So hopefully they'll be addressed by all levels of government. I had a lot of questions about the zoning, where they came from, and I still haven't found out who drew them up in reality. And I also want to thank the mayor for our good chat we had the other day, which I'm not going to speak on what was in the letters that I give to council. They were all good concerns, that a lot of people will have the same concerns, I'm sure. But I also would encourage anybody that's into greenhouses, gardening, or anything such that isn't addressed as well in there, they should consider becoming members of the Federation of Agriculture. They have an unlimited amount of expertise on right from the little gardeners to everything. And a lot of people in the rural areas probably could use that kind of information. I have a request. I don't know if this is the place for it, but whether council and mayor would be considering this, that they would set up a subcommittee, which you do for a lot of council requests, and you have subcommittees and stuff. A subcommittee set up of possibly 3 or 4 rural people and 3 or 4 of yous, and that could expedite the process. And the other meetings that are to follow, maybe they won't be as long as some would be. And I will finish by saying, and I'm not being ignorant or in any sense, but I don't have much faith in the bureaucrats when it comes to the knowledge and my love and the way we farm and grow vegetables. They do not know anything about that, and the rural life has been generations for some families, and I hope that we can protect all that in the future with these zoning laws.
That was the public hearing of objections to zoning bylaw Z-4 in the municipal district of St. Stephen on Thursday night. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will be looking at the tenders that came in for the Market Square and Market Wharf project in St. Andrews.
I'm immediately concerned with the wharf and the environment, tourism and heritage concerning the wharf and the downtown core.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We're going to go back to St. Andrews now for some new information that has come to light about the deadline on the Market Wharf refurbishment and Market Square expansion. And I've deliberately separated those projects because I feel like there are 2 projects that are kind of mingling as one. So we were curious about the deadline. I know there was some questions that had been brought to us about the deadline that was being publicly shared, which was March 2026. So naturally, as someone who is often curious about these things, I asked the federal government to look into that on September 3rd, because the money comes from the federal government.
And just to preface that, tell us a little bit more about the March 2026 original deadline. What was supposed to have happened at that time, and why were they thought they were at risk of losing the funding for the wharf?
So essentially what was said was the money needed to be spent and the project moving forward by March 2026. And if that didn't happen, they would lose the money. That was the exact quote. We actually pulled it, and if you watched the news this week, you would have heard that quote. So there was a sense of real urgency from the council to move forward, because without this federal money, this project doesn't happen at all. The municipality simply can't afford to fix the wharf in its own budget. I mean, its budget is about $6.4 million, and with the assessment freeze, that will likely stay the same for the next at least year or more. So it was a question of urgency to get the project moving forward and that money spent so it didn't disappear.
Okay. So what was it, that was your first step when finding out what the actual deadlines are as we know them now?
Yeah, so I've only been here for a year, so I've only been covering this subject for a year, and I had never heard up until that point where exactly within the federal structure that money had come from. So on September 3rd, I reached out to the federal government and I said, can you tell me where this money is coming from and what the deadline actually is for it to be spent. And it took them a couple of days of going around to the different departments, between Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Infrastructure Canada. And finally, we arrived with Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada. And they have several streams of money that were allocated under the previous Liberal government as early as 2018. And so this bilateral agreement, which is how they've distributed this money, has been amended several times. And the last time it was amended was in 2022. So this agreement has not changed since then. But essentially they said to us that, the project had to be substantially completed by October 2033, which, if you can do math, means that it's nowhere near 2026.
So another 7 years.
Right. And in their explanation to me, they said the money is then distributed to the province. And so in my mind, I said, okay, now I have to go to the province and ask them the same questions I asked the federal government. And I did that on September 4th, and we received a response on September 5th. Just explaining that the deadline was in fact March 2027, not March 2026. Again, another year away from the original deadline that was being shared, but I also needed to ask if the money would be taken away, because it is, plausible with government grants that money could disappear. Governments change, priorities change, and so money could be redirected to other things. And this money is funded through the green infrastructure stream, so it deals with climate change. It has to help mitigate climate change, which is another part of the project. And so they said no, that they wouldn't lose the money, and that the March 2027 deadline could be extended if they provided a justifiable reason for that extension. And no, they wouldn't lose the money if they filed an extension beyond the March, an extension application beyond the March 2027 deadline. So I still don't know where this March 2026 deadline actually came from.
Okay, and why this is important, I think, is when we look back on going ahead with this wharf as was decided by council, a lot of the reasons why councillors decided to vote in favor of going ahead was this strict timeline that we were all under the impression was in place. And so what happens next?
So, yeah, I mean, the sense to me was that everyone was deciding based on the timeline of this money. And again, if you watch the news this week, you would have seen a compilation of people who had expressed that openly in meetings, and I've heard it in conversations I've had otherwise. Like, it was about spending the money so that they didn't have to worry about losing it. And that's no longer part of the equation. And so what happens next is up to council. So the tenders went out. The tender package went out and bids have come in now. You and I both attended the public opening, which is a process where the tenders come sealed to Town Hall, which is down on Water Street, and then they're brought up to the W.C. O'Neill Arena to be opened in full view of the public, which is a very important part of the transparency process. The estimate for this project was about $7.5 million. So, the money that they currently have covers that estimate. The projects that came in yesterday were what I would describe as pretty substantially over budget. And we have heard from Acting Mayor Kate Akaji that if it is over budget, potentially the project doesn't happen. They don't do it. But you were there as well, and I think you were surprised to hear some of the amounts that were being read out to the public.
I think especially because the first envelope that was opened was for around 17 million. So I think right off the bat it was, oh, okay, we are well out of the ballpark. But the lowest one was around 9.5, so still a lot over what the budget was. But really, I mean, the average was around, I'd say, like 12.5 million for this project. Now I know when you and I were also prior to the tender meeting at the staff-led meeting that's not televised, so you can't look for that on our YouTube channel, but Nathalie and I were at the staff-led meeting on Monday where CAO Chris Spear told council he had heard from the province that they did have more time. One of his concerns, though, in that meeting that he said to council is, yes, maybe you do have more time, but we're still, when you think of cost, he said cost is going up, so maybe you should still consider doing it sooner than later and not using this time to take longer to decide what to do. But then when we're looking at these tenders come in, I had that in my head, really. I had Monday's meeting where he was talking about, okay, price will go up, but then we're looking at current prices anyway. So that's where does it leave them now? If these are much over budget, they do now have more time. Do they use that time to redesign, also given public feedback that we've heard recently? I'm interested to see where this goes next. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who was under the illusion that it was going to stay around the $7 million mark may have been, wearing rose-colored glasses. Things are more expensive than they have ever been. There's a trade war in effect. A lot of the product can be sourced in Canada, but surely there's going to be some stuff that's going to be more expensive. This project is massive in scale. When you think about the amount of infill that's coming, this 250-pound armor stone, the expansion 4 times the size of Market Square's current capacity. This is a massive project, and so to be under the impression that it would be anywhere near $7 million it wouldn't have been very accurate. And I think that the other concern that was brought up in that staff-led meeting is that the wharf is under the risk of facing more weight restrictions or closure, and we did a lot of digging about, is there a structural engineering report that says that this wharf is under threat of collapsing or facing structural issues? And you walk on the wharf every day. If you walk around the bottom part of the wharf, you will see timbers that are broken. You will see infrastructure that is rotting or old, and that is no surprise to anyone who lives here. It needs work. That is not in question. But to our knowledge, we have been unable to find a structural engineering report beyond 2018 that says, this is the end of the life for this wharf. I think even the one in 2018 said, it had structural insecurities and it would need repairs over the next 15 years. And we've really only been for 7. So it is coming up to the 15-year mark, but we still have time. So the grand theme here is time. You have more time. Perhaps it is the opportunity, as Councillor Steve Neal suggested, to take a step back and look at how you can mitigate the other concerns that councillors have, losing that summer tourism season, the risk of the wharf collapsing or the wharf being closed to the public, and break the project up, or look at a different model, or look at some of the accessibility concerns that Councillor Steve Neal has raised very extensively. How much of the wharf is actually under a weight restriction? I actually don't think it's that much. And what can't go on the wharf and what can go on the wharf and that sort of thing. So I think it's actually very limited on what can't get on the wharf. So the next step is for council to consider these tenders, decide if there is a room in the budget to move forward with the tenders as is, or unfortunately go back to square one.
But if you're back at square one, at least there is this new deadline of March 2027 of getting things moving, and also with the potential extended if it's justifiable. So at least, those two things are sort of coming to light at the same time. Maybe the tenders are a lot over, but now we have been gifted with this time that we didn't know was there. So it will be interesting to see where they go from here. I know Councillor Annette Harland on Monday night's meeting said she'd been hearing a lot from the public, had a lot of questions, was hoping they could get more information. Also maybe things like, more drawings that are the one that went to tender in a place that could be easily found by residents as well, so that people felt like they were in the loop. Obviously, this has become a very big topic all summer long here in St. Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, she asked for a dedicated section of the website to be available for folks to get all of their wharf information in one place. But I think the objective thing to note here is that it has to have all the information, which is that the wharf is not accessible when they make these changes. They're going to be removing the ramp that's there. There is an asphalt component to the surface of Market Square, which is something that council hasn't been. And it is going to be built on a hill. All these things, you have to give the good with the bad, I think. But I don't actually know that staff at the town of St. Andrews will actually be able to do that. I mean, they're short-staffed at the moment, and they're dealing with a lot. They're running a municipality on top of trying to, guide council and get things done, and municipal plans and zoning bylaws and wharf projects. Not to excuse, the situation that's happened, but certainly it might be difficult to have that undertaking.
All right, well, it'll be interesting to see where we go from here.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to look at some unique Charlotte County hockey.
Super excited to be back, and St. Stephen's is a fantastic place to be so far.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We're heading back to St. Stephen with the arrival of the County Moose, the new NCDC hockey team bringing elite junior hockey back to the region. So exciting.
Yeah, what a kind of a roller coaster of an adventure that we've been on with the National Collegiate Development Conference. Originally, there was 2 teams scheduled to come to Charlotte County, one in Blacks Harbor and then one in St. Stephen. Unfortunately, the owner couldn't continue, so the Eastern Charlotte Kingfishers were sold to a U.S. owner, and then a silent owner came on to what was the St. Croix Seawolves and has rebranded them the County Moose, and is an angry moose if you look at their jersey. So they're ready to do some intense hockey, it seems.
Intense hockey. Maybe the logo is an angry moose, but I had the chance to meet the team, or the development of the team, because the roster is still work in progress. And Kyle Adams, the new head coach, too, last week, which was really exciting. And County Moose is branded to represent the entire county now, so that all of Charlotte County can get behind them. And as you said, a silent owner has come in to make this a reality. Kyle Adams, head coach. I got to talk to him last week in St. Stephen, and he was able to call a bunch of players up that he had worked with in the past. He's coached all over North America, and bring together a starting roster. And then also they had an ID camp last weekend. So there are players from across the region who will be vying for one of the remaining spots on the team. So I think we'll find that out later this month. They had their first exhibition game, and unfortunately they did lose, but honestly it was just a matter of days forming a team. I think they had arrived just a few days earlier in St. Stephen. So they played the Woodstock Slammers in the first exhibition game. I think it was around, I'm going to say, I wasn't at the game. I heard it was around 4-1, so not a devastating loss, but hopefully they keep hitting the ice before their first home opener, which will be September 19th.
Yeah, we're excited to get our first set of tickets. Certainly Liam is a fanatic hockey fan, so we're excited to get our first tickets for the season. And it was interesting to hear about these young kids being quite excited to come and play, not only in St. Stephen, but also for Coach Adams. It speaks to his character as a coach and his ability to lead these young men and, potentially their hockey careers wherever that takes them.
We talked to, for Newsbreak 26 this week, not only did we talk to Coach Adams, but also to Bronx Bodner. He's a goaltender from Toronto, so he had just arrived in St. Stephen. Great guy. I saw him again at Pizza Delight this week. That is the nature of a small town. They will be seeing a lot of us. And JF Racine from Montreal, who is 20 years old, so really he's at the end of being a part of this league. He got the call from Coach Adams, though, and he said, what an opportunity. And obviously when you are the 20 20-year-old in the end of a 16 to 20-year-old age bracket, you could be a leader on the ice as well. So look to seeing him in one of those roles of being really a good ambassador for the team. But it's exciting to see the community really embrace having this elite junior hockey back in the Garceland Civic Center. I think there were just under 800 people or so that came out for the exhibition game on Tuesday. So excitement is building already, and we look forward to checking out lots of these games over the winter as well. But they are still looking for billets and volunteers. So the email is volunteer@countymoose.com if you are looking to help out in any way, whether it's doing tickets at the games or whatnot, or if you're able to house one of these young hockey stars.
Monthly. So sign up to be a billet, because not only can you help a young hockey player thrive, but you can get season tickets to watch hockey all winter long, which is a great addition.
I did have a few guys that were on my radar, and they were able to come out, and I'm so thankful for them to come out, because there's some pretty good hockey players, and it gives a little familiarity to myself too when they're here. It makes me feel a little bit more comfortable too, and I'm sure it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable with me being here as well.
The NCDC League, sometimes they go to the high school if they're still high school age. They bill it with families in the community. How important is the community in the experience of building the team?
Well, I mean, every single place I've coached, the community is what drives the team. It's not just the community, it's the billets, it's the volunteers, it's everybody involved. Like Eastern Charlotte County, we want all Charlotte County, Washington County. We're trying to pull in everybody we can from all around here, just to see these young men. They've worked very hard for this, and it's a good opportunity for them, and we want to share what these guys are doing with everybody around in the community, and we hope that everybody does come out and watch these guys, because there will be some players that do move on, and it's always fun to keep track of these players when they're done playing junior, to see if where they are down the road. So we really think the community is a big aspect here for us, not just in St. Stephen, but everybody else around.
Now we're looking ahead to next week.
Monday's St. Andrews Council meeting is going to be a big one. I anticipate it going to be a big one, and the town has as well, because they've moved the meeting up to the dining room in the W.C. O'Neill Arena. So I will be back for that. It's going to be an important meeting. The council will decide on tender. So this is the most pivotal moment, I think, in this project's history so far, and I'm excited to be coming back to that, although I'm sure the break will be nice.
I'm sure the break will be nice. We're expecting to film that in the dining room too, just given the turnout that's expected. If you are watching the show after September 15th, though, I would say if we built up this Wharf conversation, go to our YouTube channel right now, because the outcome will be there. At the moment of taping, though, we don't know, so I'm curious to see what happens on Monday as well, but looking forward to the weekend first. Thank you for joining us all on This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.